how long did you work in the AG's office?
4 years.
And how did like the whole issue of the transgender and pediatric medicine in particular come onto your radar?
Well, for a while, if we're talking 4 years ago, I was just following it casually, like a lot of people do, catching news stories about it, reading more and more. My friends were starting to ask questions, friends who had kids, like we were having these whispered conversations of what is transgender and why are kids being taught that they have a gender identity? So I just dug in more. And as I got involved, I started reading. I got to a point where I really wanted to understand the other side because I knew all the problems with gender medicine, and I said, I need to understand the other side because I'm a lawyer. So what is the best case for it? And I started trying to build it by reading what the gender doctors said themselves, what their lawyers said for them in court. And I was just shocked at how little was there. It was, just a bunch of logical fallacies and broken links and statistics that didn't turn out to be true.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you're an out of the closet lesbian. And this, two of my friends who are in a lesbian marriage, early on, I said to them, you need to look at this. Like, you should care about what's happening here because they're doing conversion therapy on young lesbian girls and young gay boys, or even just ones who aren't lesbian or gay, but are just like gender nonconforming. They're like not allowing, especially butch lesbians, to just grow up to be butch lesbians. It's like, no, you're a boy. You have to be a boy. And they didn't really take me seriously because they're of the left. And they kind of rolled their eyes like, oh, this is just like the former Fox News host doing her thing. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, but this is a thing.
It is, in fact, a thing. It's a horrible thing. And that's what we found when you go into kind of when you go deep and see how this started in America. And, the first gender clinic for kids was opened with fanfare in 2007. They were looking for kids who had played with opposite sex toys, so-called opposite sex toys when they were young, and who kind of hung out with kids of the opposite sex. And this is highly correlated with being gay when you grow up. A lot of us remember being those kids. And that was the prototype for who should be transitioned. And of course, the doctors frame it as, no, the kids are asking for it. The kids are saying they're very upset if they can't have it. Well, yeah, I mean, some kids do wish they were the opposite sex, and you tell them they can't be. That's what you do. You don't say, oh, well, we have some drugs that will save your life.
Exactly right. And yet that all of the entire industry has been co-opted to say affirm, 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 affirm. You tell the kid if he thinks he's actually a girl, he is. And that you're the wrongdoer if you say anything other than that it's conversion therapy for you to tell a biological boy that he is a boy, or a biological girl that she is a girl, that's conversion therapy. All right. So you're in the consumer fraud department of the AG's office, but you're starting to take an interest in this and like seeing this is not great. And I can't find the evidence to support the other side. And then I understand you became concerned about a detransitioner. You heard a lesbian detransitioner on a podcast and got concerned. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, that was a turning point because I had previously seen gender medicine as being cosmetic. A woman takes testosterone and then she grows a beard. And, then the only problem with that is that it's not reversible, the testosterone. So if she changes her mind, she's still growing facial hair. That's how I viewed it because I'd seen it portrayed that way in the media. But when I was listening to this particular woman who I got to know, her name is Carol, and she was talking about the physical harms that it caused her. She was saying, this caused severe pain in her vagina because it becomes dried up. It's not healthy anymore. And I was like, yikes, and she had other side effects as well that were just, gruesome. And she was in mood issues and everything that was affecting her marriage. And so she was saying I never turned into a man. I just developed a bunch of health problems. And so that's when I saw, oh, this is not cosmetic. This is harmful.
Mm-hmm. This is actually harmful. So you start your blog, but you do it under a pseudonym because you're working in the AG's office and you're like, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play. And then as I understand it, you started to see that the AG's office was actively against you on this issue under Tish James.
I did. I mean, from the beginning, I knew they were generally in favor of the trans rights. It's a big agency. They do a lot of things. And at first I felt like, okay, I don't have to agree with my agency on everything. But as I got more into it and as history went on, like they got deeper in, they started saying more things that I thought weren't accurate. And I became more and more concerned because at this point, I had friends who were detransitioners or who were parents whose kids had been pulled into this. And so I was seeing the harm on the ground, on the weekends. And so it became, a more tense issue.
Yes, that phrase, seeing the harm, just like triggered my own process in this whole thing. Like when I did a talking points memo a couple years ago about how I had decided to no longer use preferred pronouns, I began it by talking about how I used to be very supportive of trans people and transitioning and not bullying anybody. I still don't want them bullied, but that my whole theory was I didn't see the harm. What's the harm in using the pronouns? What's the harm in like talking to kids about their gender confusion and allowing that it could be something? And then you get to the point, just because it's become ubiquitous, where the harm is impossible not to see. It's everywhere. Yeah. And when you do see that harm, it's very hard at that point to stay silent. So I feel for you now working for a group that's like pushing the agenda. And one of the trigger points for you was in February 2025, they sent out a press release at the AG's office denouncing Trump's executive order opposing pediatric gender medicine. And they referred to these interventions as, quote, life-saving. So what did you do when you saw that?
I wrote an email to the press office and the chief of the Civil Rights Bureau, because those seemed like two places that should know this and were kind of behind it and responsible for the press release.
How'd
and
that
I sent
go
evidence.
over?
And, yeah, they just didn't respond.
It was very brave of you to do it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I've been a lawyer for 15 years now, and I thought if somebody commented on a press release I'd put out that said, and my colleague said there's something false in there, I would jump. I would say, what do you mean? I'd look at what they sent me and I would check with my boss, like, oh, do we need to retract this? Like that's normally a big deal in government law offices, in my experience.
But they didn't, because it's agenda driven.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Okay, so then there was another incident where a coworker of yours, this is just this past April, was slamming girls who don't want biological boys playing in girls' sports. He was saying that they're anti-trans. And you did what?
So that happens during a staff meeting with maybe 20 people. And what he said was not on topic. My bureau did not handle any issues like this. But he, it came up and he had this little dig, like, this anti-trans laws. And referring to this one in Long Island, actually, that my agency's involved in. So I didn't say anything at the time because it was close to lunchtime. And frankly, we were always hungry at those meetings. I didn't want to distract. So later on, I went to his office and he and I were friendly. Like we'd gone out to lunch together. We usually talked at happy hours. So I went and I kind of gave him some statistics about boys who had been winning girls' track meets. This was, the springtime. And so we've been seeing these boys headed toward state titles all across, blue states. And I told him, this is an important issue. It's not just anti-trans to support these laws. It's pro-girls because they're not able to win anymore in sports. It's important. And he immediately was, he was emotional. And he, at first he somehow thought that I was going to report him to our boss, which obviously I was not. And so that was confusing. But then finally he was like, I have the position of the office, so I'm not going to get in trouble, basically. And I was like, that's fine. I didn't want anyone to get in trouble. I just thought we would kind of debate this because we're friends and we're lawyers. But that is not how it went. And he acted like I'd done something wrong by coming to speak with him. And he said, if you say one more word about this to me, I'm calling HR. And I said, okay, sure. And then I don't know whether, I can't say for sure whether he did, but timing wise, it was a few weeks later that I got an email from the general counsel's office.
About your blog, which had been under a pseudonym, but suddenly they're like, you know what? This is probably not consistent with office policy.
Well, and actually at that point, it was under my real name. So I had switched like the previous October. Yeah, so you could Google me and find it at that point.
But they hadn't up until then.
Yeah.
So now they don't want you to be able to say your position on an important issue, especially within the LGBT community, outside of the office. And is that normal that can lawyers normally not say how they feel about any dicey issue, on a blog or in an interview or, in any public way?
Well, there's two issues: whether lawyers can say anything that contradicts their firm, and whether government employees can. And so the question turned on, and yes, lawyers can share their opinions generally. Uh, And as a government lawyer, as a government employee, yeah, generally we have First Amendment rights, and they can be a little bit restricted. There's a balancing test that the office has to go through. This is based on Supreme Court precedent, including a case called Pickering. But I had looked at that case law and I thought that I was on the right side of it, because if you're speaking on an issue of public concern, then that weighs heavily in your favor. And it wasn't disrupting the daily activities of the office, which was the standard.
Okay, so you decide you're going to go ahead, you're going to keep posting, but this would not be the end of your trouble within the AG's office, because now I think you've been marked as a troublemaker who does not support the trans agenda of the Letitia James AG's office. Because you tell me, Glenna, but it seems like from that point to the point where you lost your job, they stayed on you, creating additional roadblocks, pushing you for more information. They were kind of bullying you from my vantage point.
Well, there were certain moments when they did, but they would also disappear for a while. So, and this is where it comes in that this is just a giant bureaucracy, right? So actually at that point, if we're still in the spring, they took a long time to get back to me about the blog. So they weren't saying you can't do it, but they were like kind of trying to make me nervous, and I was posting anyway. But yeah, I did run into them because they had told me I had to file these requests every time I wanted to speak outside of work. We had this very broad policy about a speech outside the office, which again, I suspected was unconstitutional. But finally I said, okay, I like filing these requests to speak because it's my opportunity to tell you guys what I'm doing and stand up for it and remind you that this is an important issue you should be looking at from both sides. So I did that, and in June I followed their direction. I was invited to speak at the Federal Trade Commission. They were holding an event in July about this very subject of pediatric gender medicine and whether it might be harming kids, whether it could be a fraud. So they invited me to speak. I was very excited about that, and I filed a request with the office to do so.
And what happened?
Well, it was denied. So it got as far as, there's a long chain of command. So it only went up as far as my bosses in my bureau. And they said no, because the FTC's work is similar to the work I did for the AG. And I said, well, I'd really like to go. So, is there a way I can appeal this decision? And at this point, I don't blame them for not having like a legal citation, because it wasn't their job to know the First Amendment. But I said, I'd like to talk to somebody whose job it is to know my First Amendment rights and to make sure the agency is respecting them. So like, who can I talk to? And, there was some back and forth, but it came down to like, well, nobody, like you can't appeal. And I said, well, what usually happens when somebody objects to being censored? And my bosses, who had decades of experience in the office between them, going back to the 80s, they said, well, this has never happened before. And I don't know how long the policy's been in place, but that was quite an impasse. I said, okay, well, I've looked at the law and I think I'm good. And it was just impossible to break through. And at some point, this was an in-person meeting, which I had asked for at this point. And I said, and they had mentioned, by the way, that higher ups had examined this issue. They knew about my request. So people close to the Attorney General. And I said, well, hey, I'm a consumer frauds attorney in this office, and I am saying that pediatric gender medicine might be a consumer fraud. Does anyone care? And it seems like they were, and again, I'm sorry for my bosses that they're in this weird position now, but they had, it was just awkward. Like, I don't think that anybody had, yeah.
They didn't care. I mean, honestly, like you tell me, because you're on the inside, but my impression has been virtually every authority is either actively part of the lie or is remaining silent about it and being complicit about the lie because they don't want their, good person card taken away, which, the left says requires you to affirm that this is all real.
Yeah, it's not just a good person card. You get defunded if you're a nonprofit, you get canceled, all that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just Tish James enforcing this within the office. It's her emissaries. It's the next layer down management. Like, this is the way we feel about it. And you're not going to be allowed to say if you disagree. You can't speak up, even if it's literally your job to stop a massive fraud and you think you've stumbled upon one. The answer is no. You're not allowed to say that.
Well, you could say it inside the office and be ignored and possibly yelled at by a colleague, but you could not say it outside of the office because they said that was inconsistent with her legal position.
Wow. So she's not going to listen to you internally. She's not going to accept a debate. She's actually not even going to hear you out. She's just made up her mind. And that's going to be the position of the office. So how did it ultimately culminate in you losing your job?
So there was some back and forth about the FTC, and I did go speak at the FTC in July. And then we had meetings about it where we talked around in circles and did not get to address the merits of the issue, pediatric gender medicine. There were some letters and memos, and then it was quiet for several months. I didn't hear from them. I kept posting, I kept talking to journalists, and then suddenly in January, just earlier this month, I suddenly got an email from the Ethics Council. So this is a kind of new figure here. And he said that he'd heard that I was planning to speak on an X Space later that night. It's just a couple hours away because, we'd done little promotional tweets about it. So we were going to talk about the upcoming case BPJ, which was about girls' sports. That was argued before the Supreme Court. This was a preview I was doing, hosted by the Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender, DIAG. And the Ethics Council said, you can't do that. You don't have permission. That's unapproved. You can get in trouble if you speak on that X Space.
Yeah. So
I spoke on the X Space.
Next thing you did it. Yeah. So you did it. And then they fired you. They gave us a statement saying, in part, this employee's flagrant and repeated disregard of our rules and protocols disrupts and undermines our efforts to protect the rights of all New Yorkers. Do you think you did that?
I think I did disregard their policy. I don't think I undermined any New Yorkers' rights except for the gender doctors who operate here.
And what do people need to know? I mean, truly, what do people at home need to know about how these policies are hurting New Yorkers?
Well, they need to know that girls are not boys, boys are not girls, and we should not pretend otherwise. So that's number one. They need to understand that this so-called medicine has serious physical side effects, which are not being conveyed to the public or to the parents of the kids who take the drugs in a lot of cases in terms of what we're hearing. So that's what people need to know, first of all, in terms of, if you're a parent whose kid is going through this, then you need to know that you're not getting the whole story from the left media, and you might not be getting the whole story from the doctors either.
A new year means new financial goals, like making sure your savings are secure and diversified. Will this be the year you decide to talk to someone from Birch Gold Group? They use an educational approach with a deep understanding of macroeconomics. There are forces pushing the dollar lower and gold higher, which is why they believe every American should own physical gold. So until January 30th, if you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold is offering a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. To claim eligibility and start the process, just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and you are still eligible for a rebate of up to $10,000. Consider making right now your first time to buy gold and take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy by January 30th. Text MK to the number 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, just text MK to the number 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.